Right, good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to this December's meeting of the County Council Executive. I'm Councillor Martin Hill, Chairman of the Executive and Leader of the County Council. So without further ado then, could I just have someone do anybody who's present. We've got no apologies, but some of the Executive are actually attending virtually.
Councillors Fokett, Davies and Woolley will be attending virtually, Chairman.
Very good, thank you. And everybody else is present? Yes?
Glenn Garrett will also be attending virtually.
Very good. So they're all on screen there, aren't they? Obviously, and they are attending, but because they can't be present, they won't be able to vote, but of course they will be able to participate anyway. Okay?
Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you for that. Then we move on then to dealt with apologies. So it's the minutes of I'm just trying to find the minutes of the previous meeting. Is your wish that I sign these as a true and accurate record, please? All agreed? Thank you very much. Then we move on to the next item on the agenda, which I believe, I'm just trying to get sorted here, thank you. It's the revenue budget for this year, Q2. So, Andrew, please, if you'd like to introduce it, and then I'm sure Michelle will go through the details for us. Thank you.
Thank you, Leader. Yes, so this is the Q2 suite of reports that we bring to you. Thankfully showing a positive direction of travel in the figures, whereas 2021 was, as we said in this meeting previously, a year like no other. This is more steady, albeit there is still a lot of volatility in the system, as you'll see in the paper. You know, going back to the budget setting position from this time last year when we were setting that budget, clearly a lot of changes have happened still since that position. I'll just take the opportunity just to cover some of the outcomes from the spending review that was announced at the end of October, given our minds are also focused on what comes in the new year. Clearly we'll be coming to Executive with a set of budget proposals, draft budget proposals in January. The Chancellor announced £4.8 billion of new funding for local government, covering the 3 years of the spending review for use on general services, and a wider set of funding for the social care reforms. We are expecting the local government finance settlement, which will cover our allocation of some of that £4.8 billion next week. It's currently badged as week commencing 13th of October, December, so it should be at some point during next week. We think probably Wednesday or Thursday with a fair wind. There's been plenty of discussion within the sector about how that might look. I say we're expecting it to be a one-year settlement. You know, in a straight line fashion, a proportion of £1.4 billion. Typically, we receive 1% of national funding announcements during the current funding regime, albeit there is still plenty of discussion in the sector. There was some articles in the Local Government Chronicle yesterday around that 4.8 billion might be divided up in a different way. So there's still plenty of uncertainty. Just touching on the social care funding reforms, 5.4 billion announced over the 3 years. We expect that to be backloaded into the spending review position, and one of the key outcomes of some of the communications we've received from government since those announcements was that local government will still be expected to bear the brunt of demographic and contract price increases during and after this current spending review period. So still plenty of emphasis on local councils via their council tax setting to cover funding pressures in the future. So still a lot of funding uncertainty, but we do expect to hear some potential movements on the fair funding review in the new year. That's all for me, and happy to take any questions at that point or hand over to Michelle for the main bulk of the report.
Thank you very much. So the report you have is our Q2 position. The first report is our revenue budget. The summary table on page 10 shows you the variance against each of our services for their revenue budgets that they've set for this year. And the appendices from page 17 provide more details about the variances they're reporting. Our current forecast variance, excluding schools, is an underspend of 5.76 million, which is a movement of 4.5 million from the Q1 position we reported to Exec. This mainly relates to sources of income that have been received over and what we budgeted for when we set the budget back in February. The two main areas of those variances are, firstly, within the Resources Directorate on the Public Protection line, we've received a grant of 1.4 million for the domestic abuse services and new responsibilities there, and that was over and above what we budgeted for. And on the income line, so our funding sources, we've had a net gain of 2 million on our business rates pool, which we have with the district councils, which was set prudently when we budgeted, so that was over and above again what we budgeted for. The report includes the financial impacts of COVID, so page 42 on the report, Appendix K, gives an overall position of what we're currently forecasting of additional costs relating to responding to the COVID situation. We've received £15 million worth of general grant this year for supporting those costs, and we had a small carry forward from last year. So we're reporting against a general grant available of 17 million and forecasting to pretty much use all of that grant. That doesn't include some of the pressures that are being highlighted and coming through into the capital programme, which we're looking to meet within the existing programme. Appendix O in the report on page 48 shows the total of the COVID grants we've received currently in the year. So alongside the general grant that I've just mentioned, we've received specific grants of 29 million. Those do have some specific conditions to use for them, and we received some specific instructions from government about how they're to be used and recorded. The report also reports on our planned budget savings. They're detailed in Appendix L on page 43, and as it stands, we're currently forecasting to deliver all the savings that we budgeted for when we set the budget back in February. So at that point, I'll hand over for any questions, comments.
Thank you. Councillor Parker, obviously it went to overview scrutiny and it's been through some scrutiny comments. Thank you, and there have been some circulated.
Yeah, there have been circulated. I think what stands out is that we budgeted for certain things and then got duplicating government grant, particularly in the context of domestic abuse. There's a paper that's been circulated. There was also an underspend in public health, which arose from the redirection of resources because of COVID-19 funding. I think it's also reasonable to point out that the resources underspend of 1.8 million was part of the domestic abuse grant of 1.44 million. Homeschool transport, as we might expect, continues to be of concern. It was overspent by, I suppose, a relatively small amount, 0.337 million. A number of factors which is set out there, and I'm sure that we'll be keeping an eye on that particular area in the future. That's all I've got to say. Thank you.
Thank you then. I'll open it up for questions, comments, please. I suppose just to get the ball rolling, obviously there was some discussion at overview scrutiny about the COVID grants distorting the underlying budget. So I just wonder, Andrew, whether you just want to talk about, because it is, government's been very generous with its figures, but obviously that will distort what the underlying position is, isn't it?
Yeah, thank you, Leader. So we've adopted the strategy of maximising the use of those grants to obviously benefit the money that you have set in your budget for providing local services funded by the local taxpayer. So I think we've taken the right approach in that. Clearly, as Michelle set out, those funds now are broadly exhausted, and we still sort of carry some risk on the capital side, which we'll cover shortly in a second. But yeah, as I've said in previous meetings, we are experiencing cost pressures in some key demand-led service areas. So looked after children have seen an increase in their numbers of around about 10%, I think, over the period. And there's strategies being worked on to manage those over a period of time. The adult care market as well, experiencing challenges, as we have done around the waste side of things. So naturally, any of those cost pressures that are looking in a structural sort of way, or a way that might appear over a couple of years, we'll be presenting options to members in terms of how those might be managed in the future budget setting process. That's okay.
Thank you. Homeschool transport, and then Councillor Bradwell. Again, is a clear issue there that there's an overspend and it's running quite hot. So I don't know who's going to just address that, please. Well, Heather or something. Well, it's not sure. Is it yours still, or is it moved over to Andy yet? Still yours, is it?
Yeah, still ours. And obviously we'll always have a close integration with the home to school budget. So obviously we were aware of the pressures that were coming on this budget, and we presented transformation plans around how we could seek to mitigate some of those pressures that were coming through. We've had some additional pressures that have come through that are to do with the market volatility. So we've got a market that is really quite vulnerable at the minute. We have had providers who have tendered for transport routes and then have not been able to deliver that. So we've done all of the work to deliver it, and then they haven't been able to get the staff. Some of our providers have been impacted by the heavy goods vehicle driver recruitment campaign, which led to some of our drivers moving over onto different contracts and meant that people had to give up contracts and we had to re-tender. So this is an area that is under significant pressure. We meet regularly through the Transport Board with Councillor Bradwell and Councillor Davies to update them about the pressures on the budget. But it is an area that we're seeing increased demand and increased expense to deliver each unit as well.
I mean, obviously, there's having a re-look at how we can address these, Andy, aren't we? But it is a continuing pressure, which we're not unique, I think, nationwide. And we have a big problem, of course. We have such a big mileage to cover, but obviously there is some work going on to see how we can actually do it differently to help manage the budget.
Yeah, as members are aware, there's part and parcel of the transformation programme. There's a specific piece of work that's been set up that's sort of continuing to delve into the detail, understand the sort of like the vagaries of our own systems, the nature of the market. But as you say, Councillor Hill, this is a nationwide challenge. I was actually on a regional call last week, and other authorities across the whole of the Midlands have this same challenge. What's been agreed is that across the Midlands there's potential for a sort of peer support network to actually understand the opportunities of learning from each other's good schemes and not making the same mistakes as perhaps others have made. It will give rise to consideration in the future about whether our policies need to change to give us a different framework for actually how we take forward sort of some of these measures. But that will be taken forward into the informal executive over the coming weeks as we develop the transformation project.
So I think we've got to provide the service in a fair way, which is in a fair and safe way, but at the same time, bearing in mind that we have to, keep this budget under control, because there are other services which actually we have to provide as well. I think there is some opportunity, because I was coming up the A15 the other day, and there were from home. I was going just past, before Sleaford, there was me and 4 minibuses, all from the same company, all in a line, and I just felt, well, I'm sure there was a reason for 4 minibuses, but then you start wondering, well, is there a sense of somehow we could do it better? And I think we all know that it will require some, difficult choices, but that could be an example where why do we need 4 minibuses when maybe one bigger coach would have done the job? So I don't know where they all came from, but you got me thinking. I think, well, this is a bit the same company, it wasn't even different companies.
Yeah. So one of the strands of work is like looking in more detail at the routes and whether there needs to be changes to that, and within that there will obviously be potential impacts on certain individuals who maybe have a slightly longer journey, slightly longer wait for their transport and such like, but that is an integral part of trying to optimise the use of the services, not least now exacerbated by the points that Heather's made in respect of the challenges of actually having enough drivers to actually maintain the contracts that are in place as well.
I just wanted to, obviously, Robert mentioned domestic abuse and the new Act. I think we would welcome the new Act because it clearly sets out what partners need to be engaged, because for a long time, perhaps it was just the police and the county council who was engaged, but clearly the district councils have a part to play, and it does set out about the police and crime commissioners' duties and the police and ourselves as well. So receiving that funding will help us deliver more services, but it doesn't, it won't pay for some of the contracts. I mean, we do the contract with Eden Links, which provide the sanctuary scheme and other schemes for the for men and women if they need refuge protection. But there's a whole range of other things that we're going to have to put together and develop following the Act. But the police and, as I say, the PCC are very closely working with us. We have regular meetings. I think the next thing that we will be looking at is a fit for purpose perpetrator programme. We haven't got one in Lincolnshire. We have PCC bid for some money a while ago, but we do need a proper perpetrator programme, which is something that we're all going to be working on, and hopefully that will be achieved. But the grant can't be always paid for the likes of the perpetrator programme or the refuge programme. It is for specific things. So, but it is, I think it's a good thing that we've got that, because now we are, you know, we all know clearly what we're responsible for, and very often it can be a bit muddy sometimes. So I welcome what's happening and take the county forward, and we'll be able to support more people.
Thank you. I'm not seeing anybody else indicate. Yes, I've got Councillor Davey. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. Yes, it's a good report, and I think there's some positive stuff in it. But I just wanted a question really to Andrew. We've already heard about the pressure on transport in terms of labour and drivers, etc. And I just wanted his view in terms of the labour market generally and the pressure it might put on budgets going forward. We obviously have a lot of contracts regarding care in particular. I know that is really under pressure. And the only way of retaining staff in a very volatile labour market is by paying them higher salaries. That obviously puts enormous pressure on us and our budgets. And government doesn't recognise our funding in a way necessary that we can deliver the services that we need for our communities at the right level, because we don't get the right level of funding. It's quite clearly going to be pressure going forward. The pond is very small in which to fish, as they say, in terms of the labour market generally. And we are competing in care with the private sector for leisure and hospitality. Drivers, we're competing with Amazon and all these other companies and home delivery services. So I just want to get a feel for what kind of thinking you have, Andrew, going forward about how much pressure we're under. And also, alongside that, we have what's called the Great Resignation, as people leave the labour market without looking to go anywhere else. It's 600,000 already in the UK have just left their jobs and not claim benefits, they've just gone to do something else. So, you know, is that going to continue, do you think, and how is it going to impact on our services and budgets going forward?
Thanks, Councillor Davey. I can probably provide a start start of an answer to that question, and maybe some of it's more of a debate for us to have on a more regular basis. But I'll just point to I started the preamble talking about the funding side of it. Clearly, the government, with the announcement that they made around the 4.8 billion, I think that's an acknowledgement of the inflationary cost pressures that are now almost going to be baked into the system. Clearly, the Office of Budget Responsibility papers that went with the budget and commentary that's come out since suggests that inflation could hit as high as 5% next year, and that's going to have numerous impacts. Other announcements that the government have made, again, are baking in, you know, sort of structural cost pressures for us in terms of how we pay our staff. So the national insurance increase to pay for the care changes, a slight increase in the national living wage. So we'll start to see the impact of those figures when we bring the draft budget report to you in January, and perhaps more debate time then. Clearly, in terms of the wider world, yeah, we are starting to see it. The Amazon example that you provided, you know, the care workers competing with £20 an hour jobs in Amazon distribution centres not too far away, is going to present a real challenge. In terms of our sort of corporate human resources figures, that isn't necessarily translating into a big spike in terms of turnover yet. We're almost returning to pre-COVID levels, whereas people have stayed in roles during COVID, and we've seen less turnover, so the actual corporate figures reduced down. It is starting to return to pre-COVID figures, and I guess the challenge is whether that grows more, and then how quickly we can arrest that decline. Colleagues, you know, we're working with Councillor Boutroyd at the moment around looking at potential attraction and retention measures that we can deploy within our own workforce to ensure that we maintain our position as an employer of choice, and, you know, can attract and retain the best people, so we can continue to be the good council that we are and are known for. But you're right, the storm clouds on the horizon. I think that's the start of my answer, but there'll probably be more to come in debates in future meetings, if that's okay.
Thank you. I suppose the only issue is we've talked about, I think Councillor Davey talked about market, labour pressures and all the rest of it. I suppose, James, in terms of the transformation, I know we're talking about future budgets, but there is, excuse me, work going on in terms of how we modernise our operating procedures. So we just want to talk a little bit about how it's going on that front.
Yes, thank you, Leader. So, yes, as part of the sort of digital activity, really, we are considering different types of business processes and where it would be appropriate and correct to use automation. Firstly, we need to log that process and understand that process and standardise and simplify that process, but then we need to automate some of them where it's appropriate to do so. And that could relieve some labour pressures for us. However, I guess the counter side to that is some of the skills we need to do that are in very tight supply at the moment in the labour market generally. So there is an issue around ensuring we can secure the right skills to make that stick and make it work effectively. So it's a slightly double-edged sword at the moment, but certainly the position that we will get to should have less reliance on some elements of the labour market. And despite all the digital opportunities within social care, you still won't be able to replace the face-to-face care that we should be delivering to a number of our residents. So that won't relieve that pressure significantly, but it's certainly an opportunity that we need to take.
Thank you for that. Right. I think we're done, aren't we? Thank you. So the recommendations are there on page 9, which basically we note the report and basically on track financially as usual, which is good news. So is that agreed? Thank you. Right, I apologise. I seem to manage to miss items 2 and 3, so we need to just retrace our steps a bit. So item 2 then was any declarations of councillors' interest. Are there any? There are none. Nobody's indicating, so that's dealt with. Then we move on to announcements by myself or any member of the executive. I've got 1 or 2. We had a successful ambulance summit last week, which was, again, partners from the 999 services, NHS, got together to build on the very good work which Councillor Bradwell's been leading on, where basically we've set up the full service and which has prevented a lot of people having to go to hospital. And they've been, as the name would suggest, they've had a fall and they just need a bit of support to enable them to stay in their own house, and which is better for them, but also relieves pressure on the NHS. So we're going to expand that to other areas, and there's a programme set out which the Chief Exec is going to lead on to make sure we can build on that excellent work, which has really worked very well. The other thing is the Environment Act Bill. There is now an Environment Bill that has gone through the House of Commons. I think there will be substantial changes to what is required of local government and us, of course, and I think currently officers and Councillor Davies looking through the detail of that. There's a long paper, but I think there will be some quite substantial changes required. The white paper on devolution and levelling up, although promised before Christmas by Michael Gove, I think everybody's accepting now will be after Christmas. And obviously, again, there'll be some substantial announcements. And we've already talked about the announcements on adult care and the reforms to the adult care services. Again, more details yet to emerge on that. So there's quite a bit of change happening at the moment nationally, which will impact obviously on us. Are there any other announcements any other Executive Council wishes to make? Not seeing any. Right, I'll move then on to item 6. So we revert back to finance, which is the capital budget monitoring report for quarter 2 of this financial year. So is it straight to Michelle? Thank you.
Thank you very much. So our quarter 2 position that we are reporting at the moment is an underspend of 33.9 million, which is a movement of 7 million from our quarter 1 reporting. And whilst we show this as an underspend position, this reflects some slippage in the programme and timing of delivery, and our budget's being reflecting and rephased to reflect that. So it's not an expectation that those budgets will not be required for the purposes that they were allocated for. On the blocks, the main underspend is the contingency that we hold. We hold a £7.5 million contingency to deal with items as they come up through the year, and that reflects the requests that we've had against this fund at the current point in time. And on the projects, the main variance is on a couple of the major highway schemes, particularly in Spalding. Some delays there due to land acquisition and design requirements, causing that project to slip. So that was just the two main variances I was going to report, and leave it open for any questions or comments.
Thank you. Councillor Parker. Scrutiny.
Yes, Overview and Scrutiny Management considered this report, and in essence we followed much the same line that's just been outlined. 33 million underspend, contingency, major highway schemes. We noted in particular, though, supply issues impacting on the construction industry and IT, which were leading to long delays. Chips were a particular noticeable example of us not being able to get what we want. Delivery of supplies of materials. But there was nothing that we thought that there was something that we wanted to bring a particular attention to in relation to the service departments. The capital monitoring programme is being monitored regularly, and so too is the slippage.
Thank you for that. The comments have been circulated there. And again, back to the issue of inflation, and which is going to be an issue. We have a substantial capital programme, but again, what mitigation measures we're looking at to try and mitigate some of the inflationary pressures on our capital programme. Andrew.
So yeah, that sits sort of between mine and James' area. We've been managing a sort of a corporate oversight between myself, James and Andy around what the impacts that materials costs are having on our capital programme, as outlined in the report. My personal view is it's still too early to tell what that's going to land on at the moment. Clearly, the projections that I talked about in my answer to Councillor Davey on the last item, you know, are the prices going to? I think the key question is: are the prices going to stick, or is it a short-term blip? There will be some structural change element that we need to account for at some point, but it is still very much a wait and see, and is impacted on different types of materials as well. And I don't know whether my two colleagues would like to add to that. Clearly, we're coming up to budget setting again, as we talked about already, and we'll have to account for that within some of our budget setting projections, and maintaining our existing, our spend within the existing approved envelope that members have already set out. So I think there's constant monitoring going on. We're looking at individual projects and seeing how they're impacted, but there is an element of understanding whether it's a structural compared to a blip, I think, at the moment.
Thank you, Leader. Yeah, agree with what Andrew said, and I think particularly timber and steel have seen significant increases in cost, and also issues with supply. What we're starting to see, and I agree with Andrew, I think it is too early, but what we're starting to see is a levelling out of that, but that levelling is at a higher level than it was pre these issues, so hence the inflationary pressures. The other issue that remains is around supply of certain technological type equipment linked to chips and things like that, and that's not a huge inflationary pressure, but it is causing significant delays in us accessing certain types of kit, if you like, around IT, which will start to cause some problems if we can't resolve that soon. But again, we're doing all we possibly can with Microsoft and with other big suppliers, and working with Serco as well to try and get any supply that we can get.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, I think the view is that we have a substantial, over 150 million capital programme, and I don't think we can just keep adding money on top of that to cover excess costs. So I think the truth of the matter is that it is financially, it is what it is, and obviously that it may mean it won't mean things are stopped, but it might mean, if this continues, that some things will take a bit longer than others. I mean, highways is probably one of the largest parts of our scheme. and we got an overspend in potentially at Spalding. But we've just finished a major scheme today, which is Sleaford Holding and Roundabout, which I believe came in under budget, Andy. But so it's not all bad news. Do you want to have any comments from the highways? Is a particular issue because costs, just keep increasing there all the time.
Yeah, we've got ongoing discussions with most of our contractors in terms of being more commercially aware and commercially astute to try and manage sort of challenges within the actual programme. It has had an impact on the contracts that we're awarding in terms of the approach that we're taking. And, for example, we'll be bringing a report early in the new year so the whole of the executive can understand the potential implications for schemes like North Highcombe Relief Road. So at the right time, there's an opportunity for, as you've indicated, Councillor Hill, to sort of then decide whether we want to progress on at pace or whether we want to revise our programme accordingly, or the implications of progressing on one scheme, what the implications of that might be. I think the holding and roundabout coming in within budget is a good example of when we work closely with contractors, actually we can all come out with our on programme, on budget scheme, which is in everyone's long-term interest.
Thank you. Any further comments, questions? Again, the recommendations there are that we note and actually advise of any corrective action, which I think we've done. So is that agreed? Thank you very much. I think everybody said agreed there. I think they did, didn't they, Debbie? Right, item 7 then. It is now Derek's, your annual report. So Derek Ward, our Director of Public Health, I'll leave the floor to you then. Thank you. A very busy person at the moment, of course.
Thank you, Leader. And thank you for receiving this report. Just a bit of background. This is the Director of Public Health Annual Report, which is a statutory responsibility on Directors of Public Health to write, and there's a statutory responsibility on the Council to publish it. But because of the focus, and Heather and I had spoken about this a couple of years ago, actually, before COVID-19, because the focus is around children and young people's health and well-being, really important that it's a joint report, so between myself and Heather as the Exec Director for Children's Services, and all of the components, all of the parts, all of the narrative is about both health and the wider education and children's well-being. I'll pick out a few key points, if I may, Leader, just to give everybody a bit of a steer of that, and then really happy to answer questions because there's quite a lot of detail in there. I've covered the statutory bit, but what we've done in the report is focused on some key areas. One is overall children's health in Lincolnshire. It's always important just to give that context. Clearly, we've talked about COVID-19, both the direct impact of COVID-19, but more particularly the indirect impact of COVID-19 on children's health and well-being, school closures, mental health, isolation, those sort of things. We've broken into specific parts of children and young people because one of the things that comes out of the report, I think for both Heather and me, is we don't want to look at children and young people as a block. We need to recognise there are differences within age bands. Of course, we all know that, but some of the recommendations suggest what we can do better around that as a system. So we've looked at early years, schools and education, children with SEND, social care and support, and mental health and emotional well-being. These are all key things that come out. When you look at the main burdens of disease for children and young people, they tend to be around things like neonatal conditions, so that very early on in life, communicable diseases for younger children, and mental health conditions for older children. We unpick those further on in the report. In terms of the impact of COVID-19, it's been broadly very low in terms of direct impact. The number of children catching the disease, obviously over the past 2 or 3 months, has gone up very significantly, predominantly because we've only just been rolling out COVID vaccines for our secondary age school children, and obviously we'll be looking at primary school age children, and the vaccine's been very effective against Delta. But generally children have a mild disease, they recover, and it doesn't have much of a long-term impact, is what we understand at the moment. But they have to isolate, schools have been closed right the way through the pandemic, on and off. Remote learning, while schools have done a fantastic job to try to continue education for children and young people, that's had a hit, as have children and young people like to be with children and young people of their own ages, and that's been significantly impacted over the past 2 years. All of that will have an immediate impact, but also a medium and long-term impact, and we articulate that in our report. Some of the positives, we really have got some excellent service provision across Lincolnshire, and we talk about that. We've still got children's centres, one of the few places in the country to have children's centres, and they're a real asset for us. But what we need to recognise, the key points I think I'd like to make are that, firstly, we'll all nod at this and we all know this, but I think it's really important as a system and with our NHS partners that we recognise children are not little adults. They have specific needs, and we need to make sure our services, especially in terms of the NHS side of it, are tailored to those needs. It's not really appropriate in a lot of conditions, this being partly Director of Public Health report, to take an adult NHS service and just apply it to children and young people. Often we need a different service. We've recognised as a council, and I think everybody in Lincolnshire would agree, children are a key priority for us. The NHS integrated care system will rightly focus on ageing adults, because in Lincolnshire we have an older population, but we've got around 20% of our population are under 20. So it's a big chunk of the people in Lincolnshire are younger, and we need to make sure that as we develop our new integrated care system, it meets the needs of that those under 20-year-olds as well as we set it up to meet the needs of our older population. And the way we can do that is by delivering services that are made with and for children and young people, and actually influenced by them and their families, not just cut down versions of adult services. We need to do the primary prevention stuff. Of course, I'm going to say this as Director of Public Health, but the more that we can have our children and young people physically active, with a good diet, good nutrition, and lots of mental and emotional support, so that they get good well-being outcomes, that's going to put them in good stead for the rest of their lives. And we have to recognise, as the government has, that there is really big inequality across the county, as there is across the country, in terms of education and opportunity, access to those, and in terms of our service provision, both in terms of children and young people, broader services, but in terms of NHS services. So we need to tackle those things. I think I'll leave it there, if that's okay, Leader, because there's a lot of detail in there. I think the key thing I'd just like to say is thank you to Heather and her team for all the work that they've put into this. It really is a joint effort. We will be, the executive will remember that I've written 2 previous Director of Public Health reports. Last year's was very much about COVID, so it didn't have specific recommendations. The year before was about the global burden of disease, and we made some recommendations in that with executive's approval. The plan would be to, when we publish this, also publish an update on what the recommendations were and what we've done over the past 2 years. So happy to bring that to executive as well, so you can be cited on that. But we'll publish this joint report subject to executive approval, and then next year again pick out those recommendations and say what we've done about them, as well as what we've done about previous Director of Public Health report recommendations. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that. Yes, I think we welcome it. It's a very interesting report, just as you've just clarified that rather than have your world in a Bible, which should have gone on for 1,000 pages of your life, shall we say, I think rightly it was decided that have themes every year, so that like this is about children, so that we can drill down and look at some really, I think the format of it is very good, because it's very understandable, very clear, and obviously gives you a clear understanding, or gives us a clear understanding of the broader thing. And as you said, done very much in partnership with children, so I'll let Heather come in and any comments from your perspective.
I just want to say I think it is a really useful report. We welcome the opportunity to work with Derek on it. I think we've talked a lot about the pressures in the adult system, and I really welcome the spotlight being shone on children and young people. I think it's important. As Derek says, they make up 1/5 of the population in Lincolnshire, and we need to be focused on what their emerging needs are and making sure that our services are responding to them. Obviously, really pleased that we've got services for children in the council that are judged to be outstanding, and we work in an integrated way with our health colleagues to ensure that we are raising challenges as we see them for access and opportunity for children and young people around their health needs. So great to have this report as a catalyst really to further some of those conversations and begin to have an impact on some of the changes we need to see to ensure that we can address some of the needs highlighted in the report.
Thank you. I mean, I was particularly struck by, on page 78, the life expectancy, which is quite stark in terms of the relationship between deprivation and life expectancy. And then moving on to some of the maps where very much it seems we're a county of an east and a west. And when you look at the blue is obviously bad news, more bad news than the yellows. And it is quite striking that certainly all up the east coast, there's a clear issue there. So I just wonder in terms of how, I mean, we've got to make sure all children are well looked after and their needs are dealt with, but obviously there's a particular issue all up the coast, isn't there, from south to north.
Thank you. Yes, so one of the things that we've been doing is sharing this data with schools. We know, as Derek said, prevention is the best approach for a lot of these issues. So we know, as you've just pointed out, you can see variance across need for different parts of the county, and that goes all through the age range, and it goes through a lot of very rich public health data that involves not only health, but when children can get involved with the criminal justice system, and how that happens varies in different parts of our county. So schools have been working hard. It was a requirement of Ofsted for them to tailor their curriculum to the community that they serve. And this data was shared with them at just the right point, so that where we see high levels of tooth decay, for example, we've been encouraging schools to build that education really strongly in, not just through the lessons they do with the children, but also through the communications they're doing with parents and families, because obviously we work with schools as our universal provider for children and young people, and we know that schools really trust their teachers and their school leaders, and if we can get some of those key messages out that way, it's really important. The other thing we've got is we've got enhanced services across to some of those areas that you've highlighted. So our maternity hubs are really targeted into the areas where we want to get those really early health messages in, from pre-birth through our health visiting service and into our children's centres. So we work really hard on the preventative side of things through our service delivery as well. Really pleased that we've got a health visiting service that's integrated into the council rather than integrated into health, that allows us to deliver those messages and to have joined up messages across schools, across health visiting, so we have those multiple contacts with parents where we can reaffirm some of those messages.
Thank you. And I think the other thing I'd just like to comment on, obviously, I think some of the consequences of COVID and the lockdowns are now beginning to emerge even stronger about the consequences on children's mental health and just general well-being. And of course we had the horrendous trial last week where the horrendous details came out again. And I think the report did highlight that obviously lockdown did have an issue on it, because obviously there was stuff was going on indoors which nobody was really able to observe. So just comments on those two issues really, on what needs to happen to sort of counter that, and a reassurance probably that we were able to continue to make sure that children were kept as safe as possible during difficult times.
Thank you. Yeah, really, really tragic news, and that report was really difficult, I think, for all professionals working in this area to hear. And we're obviously dealing with risk on a daily basis, and that is something that we need to be very mindful of. In terms of our response in Lincolnshire and how we mitigated those risks as far as is possible, we were really clear from the outset that we continue to visit families. So our practitioners went into homes that were COVID positive right at the beginning, and they used PPE, and we protected our staff through the PPE, and we ensured that our frontline services had a good supply of PPE as soon as was possible and very early in the process. So we did continue face-to-face visiting. The other thing we did was we protected the supply of staff to the frontline services. So we moved staff to ensure that those services that were interacting with families where we had safeguarding concerns were protected. Where we had absence, we moved staff in to support with that. and that was really important. The other thing we did was when we get calls come to us, they come through our safeguarding line, we strengthened capacity on the front line, on the safeguarding call line, and we also made sure that we were assessing risk differently. So we added in the elements of the lockdown, so things that wouldn't have met the threshold for children's services intervention normally, if we were in normal times, did meet the threshold because we factored in the lockdown. So all of that, again, in the backdrop of the fact that we have got strong services, the council has protected its children's services, and we are performing well, so we're able to respond to those challenges with innovation throughout that pandemic period. I mean, obviously, you know, we do deal in risk, and the tragedy that we've seen reported. You know, we can't say that would never happen in Lincolnshire, but what I can assure you is we were alive to that risk. We were very aware of the risk of hidden harm. It was on our agenda, both with our lead member and our directorate leadership team, but our frontline staff were supported throughout the pandemic to continue to be in. And then finally, the health visiting service that I referred to before, in other areas of the country, they were redeployed to support the health pressures because they were employed through health. In Lincolnshire, they weren't redeployed. They continued visiting their families. They continued to deliver that service. So that gave us another layer of protection. And because they're integrated with our safeguarding teams and our early help teams, that allowed that communication about families to happen. We kept our offices open so that we could have some interaction between those teams and we could help them to continue to have the dialogues they needed to have.
Thank you. I mean, I remember we had some battles over PPE, didn't we, in the panic, and we were quite clear that we would hold our ground because there was a panic and, you know, well, basically the NHS wanted everything and we stood our ground and we wanted to make sure that, because it, you know, it's just as important, as we all know with the health debate, that adult, you know, the care is just as important as the acute sector.
Thank you very much. Just to come back on that point, absolutely. I think we worked really well. I think our businesses responded very well to our plea through the Greater Lincolnshire LEP around calling to arms, around availability of PPE. So I think there is a huge thanks to our businesses around that. And certainly we did prioritise our frontline social care staff in terms of the availability of PPE. I do want to say that I think locally the health system responded really positively across the system, particularly around the vaccinations. So as soon as the vaccinations were available, the hospital trust offered up a supply so that we could prioritise our social care staff, both across children's and adults. And that, again, wasn't a response that we've seen across the whole of the country, but it was a response that we had in Lincolnshire. So, again, I think the hospital trust in particular were very quick to offer us vaccinations for our frontline staff.
Thank you. Any further comments?
No, well, I just want to say to Derek and his team and to Heather, I think it is a very good report. It's easy reading. Sometimes you get reports, don't you, and you start to read it and think, oh gosh, it's gone right, it's gone over my head. But I think it just sets the scene about what things are like in Lincolnshire. And actually, I know it's been said, but I do think young people have struggled the same as adults have because they couldn't go to school, they couldn't see their friends, and all the social activities like the football or the dance or the, you know, music lessons all stopped as well. So their lives stopped, and I think it has made an impact on some. Some children have bounced back, but some still do struggle. So, you know, I think it is a really good report, Derek, and, you know, thanks very much. And we look forward to the next report.
Thank you. Right. Well, thank you for that, Derek. So I think the recommendation is that we receive the report and actually recommend that it's put out for publication. So is that agreed?
Chair?
Oh, sorry. Councillor Parker, I do beg your pardon.
The only point I wanted to make, and it's notwithstanding all the good things that have been said so far, is that I don't know why, but the report didn't go to either of the two scrutiny committees before it came to the executive. To make up for that, it seems as though the adult care and children's will get this report in January. So perhaps for the future we could look to make sure that it goes to the scrutiny committees first. And secondly, we might want to consider whether we publish it before it's been to scrutiny committees. I say that because if we're going to value scrutiny committees, then they ought to be given an opportunity to comment on it.
Yeah, I think that fair point. I don't know why it didn't go to had it gone? Well, can we just clarify?
I'll check.
We'll check, but I think it should. And I don't think it's an issue of timing of publication, is there?
No issue.
So we can wait till it goes to.
It's definitely on the forward plan for all the relevant scrutiny. So apologies if it's not gone through the right process. We'll make sure we
we'll
get
check
that
on
right.
that, but certainly let it go well to certainly children's and possibly to.
It's on.
Scrutiny or whatever.
It's definitely on adults and children's. I think it might be on health as well.
So we'll delay publication and
yeah,
subject
that's
to
absolutely
any
fine. Yeah.
subject to any comments from them, they can be amended appropriately. Okay, thank you for that. Right, so what we're saying is we welcome the report and subject to further comments from the scrutiny committees, it will be published in the new year. Thank you. Is that agreed? Thank you. Okay then, we move on to item 8 then, which is the draft infrastructure funding statement. So, Councillor Davey, thank you.
Yes, just a short introduction from me before I hand over to Brendan, who's going to present the highlights, because I take the paper as read. The infrastructure funding statement is now produced by us annually. It's in line with government requirements and expectations of local authorities to do so. However, in line with last year's scrutiny panel report, we're reporting more detail this year than is required as we continue to increase transparency in this area. The report has also been amended to reflect comments received from the Executive Board last year. At overview and scrutiny, and I'm sure Councillor Parker will pick this up, there was some discussion about parish and local member expectations regarding planning applications. All planning applications that come to the Development Management Service are now shared with the local member to ensure that they have an early opportunity to comment, and I'm sure all members will receive those accordingly on their email. So over to Brendan to present anything he wants to highlight in the report.
Thank you, Leader, and thank you, Councillor Davey, for the introduction. As you've said, this is the draft infrastructure funding statement, or I will call it the IFS. I assume that's okay. What it details is our work on planning obligations, commonly referred to as Section 106, and Community Infrastructure Levy, commonly referred to as SIL. Additionally, we've provided extra information on highways agreements, and I'll talk a little bit about that in a moment. As Councillor Davies said, this is an annual requirement now, and this is the second annual statement, and we did a similar statement last year for the relevant financial year. Turning to the appendix itself, the IFS itself, this year we've provided a foreword, which gives some explanatory text and which is intended to help interested parties in understanding the document. We provide a more detailed introduction, and then there are 3 main parts to the IFS which we are required to do. So there is a statement on future SIL, which is future focused. There is a SIL report which primarily relates to the financial year 2020-21, and there is a Section 106 report which primarily relates to the year 2020-21. It's here at the Section 106 report that we also provide the information on highways agreements. Turning to the document itself, the foreword you will see explains excuse me, that we are seeking to promote visibility of the process, and in going through the process, we're seeking to ensure that growth and development in Lincolnshire and in Lincolnshire communities come forward with the relevant investment in facilities and infrastructure that are required. As I said, there's a more detailed introduction this year which touches on the 3 main parts to the document. Turning to the future statement of SIL infrastructure, it won't be news to members of the committee that we operate in a 2-tier area in Lincolnshire. It's the district councils who ultimately have the option to produce SIL or not. 4 of our districts have not adopted SIL, and we've worked with them on their infrastructure planning issues around their local plans in other ways. But given the restrictions in the statute and the restrictions that were in place at the time, 3 of the district councils who were working together as the central Lincolnshire group with ourselves, so that's the City of Lincoln, North Kesteven and West Lindsey, have adopted SIL and are operating SIL. So the statement continues to explain that in future we will use SIL for the Lincoln Eastern Bypass for the reasons that the LEB has helped to bring forward land for development in the central Lincolnshire local plan area. The SIL report then, as I said earlier, touches on what's happened in the previous year, and the highlight from that is that we've secured nearly £700,000 of funding as the 4 authorities. The Section 106 report then looks at the previous year in relation to Section 106, and as I've said, we've taken the option to report on highways agreements here. There are several points which we must cover at the Section 106 report, and typically in the statute it requires us to provide a summary as well as totals. So you can see the respective sums that we've secured or spent. It's usually in the region of 2 or so million per year for Section 106. The highways agreements are a much higher total. You will see over £18 million is touched upon in the final paragraph. And then you have 4 tables which provide further details on Section 106 and highways agreements. So that concludes the IFS. The other appendix which you have in front of you is draft web text to support the IFS. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Brendan. That's very comprehensive. Thank you. So there was a long debate at over in scrutiny, Councillor Parker, and summary was there, but I'll let you the highlights if you like. There was a bit of a mix between local stuff and more general, wasn't it?
It was. And it's a good job there's a report here so that we don't have to repeat what was said. But certainly it raised local, should we say, arguments between Section 106 and SIL, because Section 106 doesn't attract a reserve pool, which people on the committee particularly wanted to see. There was the question of, again, of Section 106 and SIL. The money from developers had to be justified, but it was suggested whether these rules and the law could be interpreted in different ways. Now, that sounds like a legal question that may want to filter through our system. It was also thought by the committee that the rules for developer contributions should be looked at afresh to determine whether a reserve pool could be created. Now, that's a recommendation, and I'm sure it'll be picked up. I think there was also a feeling, which we can't do anything about in a practical sense, which is that Lincolnshire has relatively low land values, and accordingly the contributions from developers are not very high compared to other parts of the country. So an update on the implementation of the recommendations from the developer contribution scrutiny review is going to be considered again at our next meeting. So a number of recommendations came out of the last scrutiny review we had, and we're going to look at the implementation of them. Anything else that is on the paper that's being circulated?
Thank you for that, Councillor Parker. Yes, I mean, I've just in terms of Federal thought was the nuclear disposal facility or potential nuclear disposal facility. That the issue there is if we it proceeds to the next stage, there then will be independent of the planning system, a special factors apply, and then there will be £1 million a year for the relevant community, which will rise to 2.5 million if boring takes place. That's correct, isn't it?
Yes, Councillor Hill, that's outside of the local planning system and the government policy that's in place for the delivery of a GDF facility has some very clear parameters of what local communities could then actually expect to receive, and those figures are broadly correct from the information we've had. That will raise issues then about how that money is managed in those local communities to maximise the benefit of it. And as you're aware through the working group activity, that's in relation to the area of search and the designated communities that are affected by that potential development.
So in terms of the review, which Councillor Park, I mean, obviously, there was a scrutiny review of this on the previous council, which of course, obviously then there's a lot of new members. I suppose the question then is, what's happened to that review and what's going on? Because there were some issues raised there, but I think also, I think there's more issues raised here. So I'm just interested in understanding, once the review's reported, what's happening about it.
Thank you, Leader. Yes, that review's going back to the Overview and Scrutiny Management Board this month as a 6-month follow-up, if you like, to look at any issues that have come out of the review and any follow-up needed. So it could be raised there.
Yeah, because I think there's some more issues are raised, haven't they, out there? You know, I think the previous review probably, in my opinion, probably missed some of the. There were some missing gaps there, and I know it was being looked at, Andrew.
Yeah, so as Councillor Davey intimated in his introduction, obviously this is in relation to the operation of the planning system. As we're aware, the district councils are the planning authorities making the decisions, so some of this is around our ability to influence and make sure that the right decisions are being made, and where appropriate, the appropriate contributions come back into the system. This report obviously focuses on giving the confidence that that is actually happening and the money's being spent on the right things at the right time. The ongoing changes to the planning system, which again are likely to be subject to a white paper on the planning bill, will give us an opportunity to review whether there are further ways in which we can actually make that system work more effectively for the benefit of local communities. And again, as indicated in the scrutiny comments, lots of expectations that exist locally, but the regulations that are in place in the planning system make it difficult sometimes for those things to be realised through the planning process. As Brendan's indicated, we secure significantly more than the planning process allows through some of our highway agreements, which is why we've been very transparent about giving people that confidence about how those elements of development impact do actually have some benefits for local communities. As you're aware, on your local patch as well, Councillor Hill, you don't always get exactly what you might think is appropriate or necessary, but the system doesn't always enable that to happen.
And I think I would say in terms of, I mean, obviously we've got the SIL 3, that's, I think, fairly set, and I think it's just a question of making sure we get the contributions promised, and I think mostly now, there were a few hiccups, but I think it's fair to say now things have settled down. Well, I certainly know where there are major bypasses, Grantham, I do remember there was a good relationship there with the relevant district council. I'm not sure it was quite so smooth in Spalding for various reasons. I suppose it's an issue of where there isn't a SIL, we have a reasonable relationship. And I suppose for me, you mentioned this local issue, because you did mention that local members would be informed, but accepting that there's got to be a relationship between the development and what's being asked for. You can't just pluck things out of the sky, so you've got to demonstrate. But there is a frustration that sometimes our system, in case what we ask for, because we have to decide what to ask for, don't we? And then it's up to the local planning authority to decide. But sometimes it does seem a bit rigid, where there's a local issue which you sit there thinking, well, actually, this should be resolved. And I certainly found that the system was too rigid as far, and we were saying, no, that's what we have a system. And, you know, the money actually, effectively, there was a development in a village which was pretty large for the village, and most of the contributions went elsewhere to the local town, and you just felt it just seemed like, you know, it didn't seem to work. I know we've got, under SIL, you've got this 25% local ask, if you like, which again could have problems, because that means that some important stuff doesn't get done because they build a leisure facility. But I think, to me, it does seem a little bit rigid, unnecessarily rigid, but I'm sure you'll advise me that you've got to be careful. But I think that's an area I would like the review to actually consider when the scrutiny committee looks at it.
Yeah. the system has certain prescriptions that are in place. As I indicated earlier, the decision maker is the district council in these instances. One of the main sort of lines of inquiry in the scrutiny review was making sure that our asks were much better coordinated so that nothing slipped between the cracks, as it were. I think that we have got better of that. Councillor Davey again referred to the fact as local members you do get a lot more information about the applications when they come in, the opportunity to engage with our officers before those comments go back. Ultimately, a lot of this comes down to the viability of the development, and the district as the planning authority take a view of actually how much money
Keep
is
saying
available.
the district, but I'm asking about what we asked for.
So
And
our ask is much better defined.
Are we just going for a rigid national template? No. Are we being more subtle?
We refine our ask based on local information, local requirements. In particular, the education system is well developed to make sure that all of the demands on school places is fed into that debate and discussion. Sorry for emphasising the point. Ultimately, the district take a look at all of the issues across the piece and then make a choice of which they think is the most important. Our data is as precise as it can be based on that, and as the report indicates, quite a lot of money's gone into school schemes over the last year, and that's been accounted for effectively.
Councillor Davis on the screen, thank you.
Yeah, thank you. I think this is one of those perennial issues that will probably never get fixed. I just wanted to pick up a couple of bits. I think SIL is a far better system, but of course land values mean it doesn't work very well. But however, I mean, I almost hate to mention this to colleagues, but we will recall that promises were made under the SIL system for Lincoln Eastern Bypass, which then frankly didn't materialise. So I think it comes back to that working relationship with the district councils again. And I'd echo your frustrations, Leader, with the MPPF. I remember an issue on Ryle Road in Stamford where it was, you know, a case of moving a 30-mile-an-hour zone. We were very keen to do it, but unfortunately the local district council's view of MPPF was unless we were prepared to object to a development based on the fact that something wasn't done, they wouldn't allow us to ask for it as part of the planning process, despite, bizarrely, the fact that the developer was quite happy to pay for it. So the whole system is in a real mess. And I have to say, I think with local government reorganisation, if it does come round, this has got to be one of the big adverts for doing things better, because the way we do it at the moment is just broken.
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, I think we've got to make the best of it, and it is... yes, thank you for that, Councillor Davis. Yeah, well, that is one solution, which unfortunately is not open to us just at this particular moment. But I think it is a question of trying to work as best we can, have a sensible relationship and make sure that the developer or really the landowner contributes as they should. But it is difficult, you know, because things change and personnel, people change, don't they? And we are a little bit on the back foot, and we'll see what the white paper says about that, which could be a concern, in the haste to build a lot more houses. Okay, the recommendations are there, unless somebody else wishes to contribute. That is, we approve the publication of the document, and obviously note that there will be further scrutiny work and report back. So in terms of reporting back once scrutiny is done, that will have to be a report back to somewhere, won't it, to take account of the recommendations which come forward from the previous scrutiny, but also the additional work that's going to happen.
That's right, Leader. Then report back to the executive.
Okay, that's great. So are you happy with that? Agreed? Thank you very much. Then we move on to the final paper, paper 9 then, which is the Corporate Plan Success Framework for this financial year as at the 30th of September. So this is the performance reporting in English, isn't it, James?
Thank you, Leader. Exactly right. That's what it is. It's the performance report. It's specifically against the corporate plan, or even more specifically against the corporate plan success framework, and it's for quarter 2, so therefore mirrors the same periods as the revenue and capital programs. The capital reports that you've received earlier this morning. As members are aware, we're taking different approach and a new approach and how we're collecting the data and how we're presenting that data and information. And that should enable the public as well to be able to access a lot more information around our performance and therefore more transparency around what we're delivering, which I think is really important. It is still a work in progress, so any ideas and thoughts around improvements would be welcome, either in the meeting or outside of the meeting. Overall, though, performance remains positive and strong, and that's despite some of the challenges that have already been raised this morning that we're currently facing. But I'll hand over to Caroline Jackson, who's Head of Corporate Performance, just to talk through briefly the report. Leader, thank you.
Thank you, James. Yeah. So as James says, we've reviewed and reflected in terms of the performance measures that are included within the corporate plan. And as you'll see, we're very much going for a kind of a Lincolnshire view in terms of having a number of contextual measures, which I'll come on to in a moment, along with the activities that you'll be familiar with. So the key activities that are delivering, obviously, the corporate plan that we've reported on previously. But as previously, we still have obviously our 4 ambitions, and we are reporting that each of those 4 ambitions are currently on plan. This report outlines those that are reported by exception. So in terms of activities, we report anything that is behind plan or ahead of plan. We have no measures that are behind plan, and those reported in the report are all ahead. And in terms of key performance indicators, we're reporting those that have been achieved, i.e. within targets and tolerance, or those that have not been achieved in terms of outside of target and tolerance. So that is all summarised on page 127 and 128. And then each of those activities that are ahead of plan are detailed then in the subsequent pages. In terms of the key performance indicators, as I said, we've got a number of contextual measures now that within the reporting framework. So that's those where we haven't yet set either a target or ambition for Lincolnshire, but we felt very much that they were there to gain a wider understanding and strategic kind of view of where Lincolnshire is. And those are all reported on the council's website, and you can hopefully see, as James says, the new reporting that we've got, which is more interactive and more visual. For the measures that we do have targets for in quarter 2, there is only one that has not achieved the target, which again is included in the report, which is around obviously unemployment rates, and the detailed kind of narrative is within there. We obviously have a number of measures that have been impacted by COVID, and particularly those around educational attainment over the last year or so in relation to particularly, young people sitting examinations. And as soon as data obviously is available for those, then we will obviously report them. And as James said, we're still continuing to develop the framework, and we're looking at developing a further set of key performance indicators around some of the areas that have been outlined. So we very much see this as a framework that continues to develop. As I say, everything is published on the council website, and I'll now hand over for any questions.
Thank you for that, Caroline. Okay, any questions? Well, no, I think we've got Councillor Parker first. Substantial debate again at the Open Scrutiny Committee.
Yeah, we poured all over it, actually. And some of the things that were of interest to us was the Power BI data manipulation and analysis tool, which had not been used for very long, still in its early stages of development. It would make a difference, and I can't help but feel that we'll come back to this after a period of time to see whether or not it is delivering it in the way that is expected to. Caroline mentioned the question of one of the PIs not being met in relation to people who are unemployed. I think the point needed making within our scrutiny meeting that we as a council only have influence over that measure as opposed to direct control. We're not responsible for unemployment levels, but we can help to make unemployment low through our activities. The Power BI came back in the sense that it's going to be part of the website design, which means that the public and members will be using it. And it was agreed that myself and Ben Smith, the Vice Chair, would talk to officers about the idea of some sort of guide help, assistance on screen that would make it an easier task. Safeguarding inquiries where a source of risk is a provider had not been reported since 2017-18, and we had a query about whether the replacement was effective. But it was a series of questions that we were asking as opposed to probing. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So just in terms of, just to remind us about Power BI, can you just describe it in English for us so we're quite clear what it is?
I'll make an attempt later, thank you. So Power BI is a Microsoft product, so it's part of the Microsoft products that we bought for the council to help support and develop opportunities within the council. It basically pulls together, it holds information and pulls together information and then helps present that information in different ways as well. So in itself, it's a very powerful tool, but it doesn't provide us with all the answers. So the inquisitive questions that we still need to ask as managers and as staff about our services. So why is that going up? Why is that going down? That analysis, we still need to be asking those questions. But Power BI, with the right skills, and Caroline will probably add into this in a minute, we can then interrogate a lot of that data in ways that we couldn't before. So we can help to understand trends better and understand reasons better. But as I say, in itself, a really powerful tool, but does not negate the fact that we need to be asking those challenging questions at times of services and around performance to be able to use the Power BI to get that information. But Caroline, you may want to go into a bit more detail. Thank you.
There we go. I think we're on. Sorry. To pick up Councillor Parker's point, we have done a how-to guide, and we're obviously getting that ready to publish to members so that it does help to navigate around. As James said, it's a very interactive tool, so hopefully it does make that navigation a little bit more, a little bit easier. And I would just echo the point James said. At the end of the day, we are still going to be very heavily reliant, and one of the things we want to focus on is the quality of the commentary and the narrative that we provide to members and officers, and that will be a key focus for us in Q3 to make sure that narrative really evidences if we're not performing how we expect, what we are doing about that, and no tool will kind of get away from that at the end. That was down to lead officers providing us with really robust quality narrative.
Yeah, thank you. I think we do want to not just put our feet up and let Power BI decide for us. As you know, there's lots of conversations about being ruled by the internet and all the rest of it. So I think we do need to have a quality, I think, which is what Councillor Parker was referring to. There was some discussion about the safeguarding measure 114. So I don't know who wants to just address that. Perhaps you, Debbie, or Caroline.
Yeah, I think that's actually a measure that was previously reported a number of years ago. So I think perhaps somebody was, a member was looking at a previous report. We do actually report safeguarding measures into Adult Scrutiny Committee, and we are looking at including a safeguarding measure, but the one that was specifically mentioned isn't one that's in the current success framework.
Thank you. Yeah, so Caroline's absolutely right. So in the previous iteration of the corporate plan, the performance indicator in relation to adult safeguarding actually focused on adult safeguarding referrals that came from providers that we were commissioning. So it was quite a narrow focus in terms of us reporting only those services that we were commissioning. Now, clearly, the contracting or the commercial team do hold that information and do utilise that information in terms of how they work with our providers. But it was felt that for the corporate plan, we needed a much more strategic performance indicator, which looked at all adult safeguarding referrals, not just those that are accessed that are referred to the council from a commissioned service. But just to reassure executive that information is looked at, and it's looked at through the directorate leadership team as well as through the executive directorate leadership team. It's just that the strategic position of all referrals is now included within the corporate plan.
I'm a bit curious about this contextual word that keeps appearing. So can we just have a bit more detail on that? Does that mean sort of soft targets, or, you know?
At this stage, we've kind of used the word contextual to outline where we have yet to set any kind of target or ambition. So excuse me, previously in the corporate plan and throughout our directorate leadership teams, we have a very robust target setting process where each of the executive directors will agree a target, a numerical target with a tolerance range, and that's how we would ordinarily then bring measures to be either ahead or behind kind of those targets. Because these measures, as we've said, a lot of them are influenceable measures. They're not things we directly control. They're not data that we directly own. That we've, at this stage in the development of the success framework, we've called them contextual because we've yet to undertake any process to set an ambition. And perhaps that's something executive would want us to consider in relation to setting some ambitions, maybe not for all 38 contextual measures, but for some of those measures where, although it's, again, we can only influence, it's still about setting an ambition for Lincolnshire. So that's what they mean at the moment.
Yeah, because that is the second recommendation. I think views, but I certainly think these days lots of cooperation is required from all sorts of services. It's never just us that deliver, we all rely on. So I think personally there needs to be some success measurement, shall we say, I'll put it like that. So even if it's a lot of partnership partners involved, at least we can, for example, we talked about the full service earlier. Well, what does success look like, and are we getting there or not? And I think that would be helpful in terms of all partners collecting themselves to account for delivery. Otherwise, you just have nice meetings and nothing much changes, does it? So I think, you know, something that obviously will go to scrutiny, but I think personally that is something we should try and do. And there's always a balance between measuring everything and then what's not measured doesn't get counted. And I think that may be a way of just capturing more valuable information. Councillor Betroyd.
Thank you, Chairman. It was more just to follow on from your statement, really, which is just because we may be in partnership working, it doesn't mean we can't still set targets for our contributions to that partnership. And I just feel that maybe we should look at that as well. And it might well actually drive some of our partners to perform better as well. Thank you.
Yeah, I concur with that as well, Chairman. I think that, you know, having targets not just for what we're doing, but what our partners are doing, and holding each other to account is important. And my other thought is on activity 30A37 regarding our ambitions for Lincolnshire. Now we've settled the economic geography of Lincolnshire, or Greater Lincolnshire, the Humber to the Wash. Do we need to put more oomph behind this activity, bearing in mind that our thoughts around devolution and on that geography means we ought to be making that case in an even stronger way, I think, going forward.
I would certainly support that. That is a key corporate ambition that we actually, and political ambition, that we actually promote Lincolnshire, historic Lincolnshire, as a national entity, and I think that's something probably needs to be taken into account when we're looking at these targets and how we're achieving that. Yeah, I think very valid point. Have I got any further contributions, please? No. So there are two recommendations. One is to, just lost it, and I'll just come back to it in a moment. Just excuse me. Two recommendations there. We consider and note the performance, which we've done, and we consider setting up an ambition for the conceptual measures, which we've just discussed, and that will be progressed throughout this financial year, I'm guessing. Ready for, and we'll start with the new regime in April. Lovely. Okay, is that agreed, everybody? Very good. Well, with that, I think that concludes the meeting. Thank you for your attendance, and see you on Friday, most of you. Thank you.